Good morning everyone and welcome to the latest edition of On The Whistle, where it feels like it's been a good while but we have a Sunderland win to talk about, and what a time to do it. Sunderland 2, Coventry City 1 in the first leg of their Championship playoff semi-final, so only half-time. Huge amount of football still to be played in this tie. But yeah, we're going to have a little bit of a chat about the game, but I thought Sunderland did really well. Maybe a little bit of some areas of concern heading into the second leg, and then as ever we'll have a look at some of your questions and comments. A lot of you asking very, very similar things today, so there'll just be a couple of sort of quick questions and some of my thoughts on them. As ever, there's an instant reaction video which you can go back and watch on the channel, which is me and James talking from the press box and the final whistle, so you can get our sort of instant thoughts there. You can also hear the away end singing Kevin Phillips songs for a solid 4 minutes as well, which is something that you might enjoy, I think. Yeah, in terms of the game, I think, as we said last night, it was a really, really disciplined performance from Sunderland. I think it was fairly clear from the opening stages of the game, even the first 10 minutes really, that we've been speaking for weeks and weeks, can Sunderland turn it on? Can they flick the switch? And the answer was sort of. I think what we saw pretty much straight away was that the defensive discipline, the organisation, the commitment, the intensity in terms of defending their box was absolutely back to where it was earlier in the season when Sunderland were keeping a lot of clean sheets, where they were defending a lot of leads very, very successfully. And so that gave me some reassurance sort of watching on, that I never felt at any stage during the game that this tie was going to get away from Sunderland. Very much came to Coventry, quite concerned about Sunderland's form, certainly very respectful of how good Coventry have been at home, how good they were in the game between these two ties, in the game between these two teams 6 or 7 weeks ago at the same ground. And I was reassured pretty quickly, I think, that the Sunderland weren't going to let the tie get away from them. The big question mark, obviously, was whether they would have enough to get something out of the game, whether they would have enough going forward to score. And it was really interesting speaking to Régis Lebris in his press conference after the game. And he sort of made clear that while he was really pleased with the endeavour, the bravery, the courage of his players in terms of defending the box, the way they stuck together, he clearly felt that there was some tactical issues in the first half, and he wasn't particularly pleased with that element of the performance. He was certainly pleased with the effort that the players had put in the endeavour that they showed, but he was a little bit concerned, particularly by how easy Coventry were finding it to overload on the right wing and build up that play. Obviously, Dennis Serkin was booked quite early on, as you remember, for that tackle on Sakamoto, one of a few fouls he had to make. So I think that Lebris felt that while there was a lot that he liked from his players, Sunderland were in a bit of trouble at times in that first half. Although, having said that, Anthony Patterson didn't have a huge amount of saves to make, and clearly the knock-on effect of that was it made it really, really difficult for Sunderland to get a foothold in the game, and certainly they weren't offering enough in an attacking perspective, as he would have liked. Sounds like the main thing that they were looking at half-time was some little tweaks to fix that. And I think you saw that in the second half. I thought Dennis Serkin looked much more comfortable. I know, albeit Coventry's goal comes from that right side, so, obviously it wasn't something they were able to fix completely. But generally speaking, I thought in the second half that Sunderland had a much better counter-attacking threat, and Lebris's view was that that was because they'd fixed those defensive issues, if you like, which meant that when they won the ball back, they were in a much better position to break. And we saw that especially for the first goal. They win the ball back in a much better position, cash Coventry out, really. And then it's all just about the quality, I think, from Enzo Lefebvre in terms of... First, it's a lovely little pass, by the way, from Daniel into Lefebvre to find him in space. And that was what we were hoping for. I think that's what the plan was, that Lefebvre would be able to drift in field, that he would get that opportunity to pick that pass. And we all sort of knew and hoped that he had it in him to find that pass. Watching it back, I think maybe the goalkeeper could do better. It's a good finish from Isidore, really good run. Certainly not taking anything away from him. But watching it back, I do wonder if maybe the goalkeeper will feel he could have done a bit better. But, that's one of those things where it's much easier to see on a replay when you see it slowed down. I didn't particularly think that in the time at the stadium. I did have a good view of it, but watching the replay just made me wonder. And then, of course, look, Coventry will be coming away from the game, wondering how they've lost it, in the sense that it's a real gift, the second goal. I think there's a lot of good play in there from Sunderland to begin with, in terms of, I think it, I mentioned this on the instant reaction video last night. I think it kind of summed up Sunderland's performance, really. Lefebvre chasing down, not entirely a lost cause, but really getting up the pitch to try and relieve some pressure for his teammates, putting some pressure on the Coventry right back, who's then forced into, and yeah, he makes a big mistake. But what a brilliant finish from Eliza Mienda. It's easy to look at it and say, it's a golden opportunity. And of course, it absolutely was. You would hope that your striker scores from that situation. But every touch was perfect. He still had so much work to do, and he didn't put a foot wrong. And a lovely finish to take something away from the game. So I think that You know, like, you always want your team to play really free-flowing, fluid, attacking football, loads of chances, loads of shots. But I really sort of respect and admire the way Sunderland went about it yesterday. I thought it was a performance of real humility, to be honest, to acknowledge how good Coventry are at home, to acknowledge the individual threats that they have. And I think to go there and to almost accept that and to focus on that defensive discipline, the way that Sunderland sort of all sort of have mucked in and fought together as a team. I really enjoyed watching it. It was a very different kind of performance. Dare I say, it was a little bit like watching kind of, Atletico Madrid in their best era under Simeone, if that makes sense, in terms of, there's many different ways to win a game, and it's actually really enjoyable to watch a team sort of fight and defend their box like that. As we talked about quite a bit on the instant reaction video, so I won't talk too much about it, but credit to Labrise because his two main decisions paid off handsomely. Dan Ballard, really sensational performance. And then there's obviously the two strikers, although we didn't see it as much in the first half, as Labrise admitted. You could see in the second half what the game plan was to find them in space where they could run at the defence. And it really did pay off. The one thing I would say, reflecting on the game a little bit when you have a bit more time to think about it, which you don't necessarily do at the time, the one thing that I thought was a little bit strange was I thought Coventry were very, very direct throughout the game. And looking back, I'm surprised they didn't change a little bit towards the end, because I think that I totally understand Frank Lampard's approach in terms of, we've seen at times this season, someone can be quite physical to that, quite vulnerable to a quite physical game plan. So when I was seeing the long throws going in the box and I was seeing all the crosses going in the box, initially my thinking was very much that I understood why that was the way to go, and I think it was probably a good strategy from Lampard. But I think when Dan Ballard was playing so well, when Sunderland were defending all those long throws so well, when they were defending all the corners so well, I'm a little surprised they didn't change it a little bit tactically towards the end of the game to try and mix things up, maybe to take a few more throw-ins short, to try and play some more short passes, open Sunderland up a little bit, especially because with Sunderland having two in midfield, you would have thought that they would have a bit more dominance of that area, and a lot of their attacking players weren't really able to get in the game. Now, obviously, Sunderland deliberately made it really, really difficult by giving them so little space and sort of sitting quite deep. But I did think that towards the end of the game, Coventry became a little bit predictable, and I think that probably helped Sunderland. So yeah, a really, really positive result. It was interesting speaking to Lampard after the game, and I don't know whether it was just mind games, because to be honest, I think what he said was right in his post-match press conference, and that from a Coventry perspective, the interesting question for them is will Sunderland be able to defend like that again, or because they're on home turf, will they feel the need to come out and play a little bit more, and will that give them the space to play in? I do think it's, Coventry remain really, really dangerous opponents for Sunderland. This is a long way from being settled, because, Sunderland's game plan tonight was absolutely spot on. They'll have to do something quite different at the Stadium of Light, I think, inevitably. And maybe Coventry will feel that now that the shackles are off a little bit for them, they can feel like they can play with a bit more freedom. There should be a bit more space for their quick players to operate in. Hadji Wright, Sunderland just didn't give him any space whatsoever. Trey Hume did a great job, but I think tactically Sunderland didn't let him sort of drive in field, didn't give him that space that he likes to attack. Can they do that again at the Stadium of Light? It's going to be really interesting to see how they approach it. So let's have a look at some of your comments and questions. As I said, a lot of them are about a similar theme, so I'll read them out and put a couple in together. Zeus Steelix Fair says, how amazing to see just how much Meander has come on in the last 5 months. In December, he misses an opportunity like that. Now he finishes it with such composure, like it was never in doubt. Massive development from a wonderful player. Yeah, I think his season in two phases, really. I totally agree with you. I think every Sunderland fan would agree with that sentiment. I think first of all, to take his opportunity in pre-season, which he did with his work ethic, his willingness to understand what Labrise wanted tactically. And then, as you say, to come back from that difficult spell in mid-season as well, where he missed a couple of chances to sort of keep his head down and fight his way back in and take the next opportunities when they came. I talked a bit about this season on various podcasts and stuff in these videos, but it's no surprise to me really, because everyone you speak to just enthuses about Meander's attitude, how down to earth he is, how studious he is. His English has developed so much in the sort of 18 months that he's been at the club, and that's just testament to how much work he puts in behind the scenes on it at the Academy of Light. The way he's able to take on tactical information, the work that he puts into training. He's a very, very, very down-to-earth, studious young man, and he's getting his rewards from that. And I thought Luke O'Neill, we spoke to him after that amazing goal Meander scored at Bristol City, You know, and 09 said, I'm not even that surprised really, because he does that kind of thing a lot in training. And 09 made the point that really, Mundle is an absolute example to any player who signs for Sunderland about A, you know, the level of work that you need to put in, and B, the fact that it might take you a little bit of time, but if you keep applying yourself, your opportunity will come. I can't really praise Mundle enough for what he's done this season. And Chris Bryant says, if Dan Ballard had been fit against Luton 2 seasons ago, would we currently be in the Premier League? It's a great question, isn't it? Because it's a great point, Chris, because, you know, we'll never know for sure. And even if Sunderland had got past Luton, Coventry in that era with Gaio Correz and Gustav Heimann, they would have been a tricky opponent at Wembley, that's for sure. But certainly we saw Luton and Coventry actually in a lot of ways tried to do what Luton did 2 years ago in terms of the way they used their set pieces, the way they bombarded the box. And as you say, Ballard was the main difference between those games a couple of years ago and what Sunderland were able to do last night. Remarkable, the amount of long throws and corners that he cleared, got first contact on. It was a really superb performance, the number of long balls that he just dealt with. It was really one of the best, as I said on the instant reaction video, one of the best individual performances I've seen in quite some time from a Sunderland player. As I said before, the one thing I would say, reflecting on a little bit last night, was I thought Coventry were very, very slow to change their approach when it became clear how dominant Ballard was in those situations and try something different. Richard says, why are Enzo's corners so bad and why is he still taking them? As a player, he's amazing, but I've not seen a decent corner yet. Well, he's probably still taking them, Richard, because I'm not sure anybody else has taken any that are that much better this season, unfortunately. Yeah, lots to love for Enzo's performance last night. To be honest, I thought that pass for Isidore was exquisite. Summed up what I was talking about in terms of that humility. You know, Enzo Lefebvre is a player who was at AS Roma at the start of the season, however many millions he went for, playing out of position last night, accepting he wasn't going to see as much of the ball as he would like, constantly shuttling up and down that wing to try and protect his full-back. I know that Coventry's goal ultimately came from that side because he couldn't stop the cross. But I think he really summed up the team display. In terms of set pieces, yeah, we haven't seen the quality that I expected from him yet from set plays. I agree with that, Richard. The one thing I will say is a lot of praise to Sunderland. I thought they were unlucky last night. I thought their set pieces generally were quite inventive, and in a couple of situations they actually got into decent positions through their routines, taking them short. That one where they worked it to the back post, I think Trey Hume was devastated, didn't get a better connection on the volley because the routine worked perfectly. There was also that free kick that they worked really well at Dan Neil on the edge of the box, which was well blocked in the end, but on another day, that could have easily been a different scenario. So I was quite reassured that over the last few weeks they've clearly been working on set pieces for these playoffs. So I do agree with Richard. It is, to be honest, it's a source of constant frustration really that Sunderland don't make more of set plays. But at least last night we saw a bit of ingenuity and trying to do things a little bit differently. So let's have a look at your main kind of questions. I think they're all kind of along a similar theme. So Chris says, do you expect any changes with Mundle a risk to start or be in the squad? Tom Shiny says, will Regis try the same tactical plan for Tuesday or will Mundle return and Lefebvre move to the middle? His vision, especially the ball for Isidore, was outstanding. His decision, Ballard for Methven, was a masterstroke. To date, his plan seems to be bearing fruit. Yeah, completely agree with that. So my thoughts is, personally, I have to say I'd be really surprised if Romaine Mundle started on Tuesday night. Obviously he has been training over the last week or so, but from what I understand, I think he's slightly behind Adji Elise in terms of when he returned to actual full training. So I think it would be a big ask for him, especially with a hamstring injury, for him to go straight into the starting 11. I would be surprised if Lebris took that level of risk. I know he put Ballard in last night, but Ballard did have half an hour under his belt in that QPR game, and he had been in full training for about a week and a half before that. So I think it's a really different scenario. I'd be really surprised if someone put Mundle in from the start. I think he'll be on the bench, but I think he'll be used in the latter stages of the game if Sunderland need him, and if not, it'll be all focus if, fingers crossed, touch wood, Sunderland are able to get to Wembley. I think that's the main when you would see Mundle play a much bigger part. So I do think he might have a role to play on Tuesday night, but I'd be really surprised if he came straight back into the starting 11, just because, as I say, from what I understand, he's slightly behind Elise in terms of when he returned to full training over the last week, so he hasn't had that much time really to get himself ready to start the game. I think the bigger question is whether Rigg comes back in for one of the strikers and you go to a more traditional 4-3-3. I think that's kind of the one change that I think Lebris will be weighing up, but I'm not sure at this stage whether he'll actually make it. Antonio says, Do we simply repeat the fight like hell in our box and hope we can hit them on the counter approach, or is there another way to go? They look so dangerous when they keep crossing into our box. Chris says, like Julio Arca, should we be worried that we can't dominate the game at all and play on the break with very few shots on target? Or is that just Labrese's ball? Stephen, do we go for a win or play safe on Tuesday? And Andrew says, I did not expect that result. Well done, Sunderland. Here. What do we need to do on Tuesday to win it? So I think it's really interesting. I alluded to before that Frank Lampard kind of laid the gauntlet down at Sunderland in his post-match press conference and saying, can Sunderland play like that? On home turf, or will the pressure be on them to come out and play a bit more? Will that give us the space we need? I think it's a huge dilemma for Labrese. I don't think you can protect a 1-goal lead. I think it's too risky an approach. I think the game's still too open, and it can change too quickly for you to just sit on your lead entirely. I think that would be inviting trouble, and it's not an approach I would like to see Sunderland to do. I think you've got to admit that even though a lot of what Sunderland did defensively last night was brilliant, things can change really quickly in football. All it needs is 1 or 2 balls to drop a little bit differently, to drop a bit more kindly for a Coventry player, and they can get a goal. So I don't think it's realistic for Sunderland to deploy as extreme a low block as this. However, what I will say is that I don't think they should have any qualms in terms of looking to create opportunities to play on the counter-attack. I think that whatever your preferred style of football is, this Sunderland team is most dangerous on the break with the pace they have, with the dribbling ability that they have. And I think it's obvious that at the moment that the attacking fluidity is not really quite there. So I think it's just about being sensible. I think there'll be spells in the game where Sunderland should look to get their foot on the ball. I don't have any problems with, Luke O'Nien and defenders taking a little bit of time on the ball to take the sting out of the game. But I think it's about being sensible, looking for your opportunities, not being sort of gung-ho in your press and looking for the opportunities to break. So my answer to that question is I suspect it will be similar in some ways, but I don't think we'll see Sunderland be quite as extreme. I think that, they will have to get on the ball a little bit more. I think they will have to get a little bit higher up the pitch, because I think inviting pressure to that extent could potentially spell trouble. But the onus is on Coventry, and with Sunderland's pace on the break, let's be honest, there's a lot of work to do. Really, really tough game ahead for Sunderland, a big challenge against a good Coventry side. But the position they're in is pretty much as good as we could have hoped for. So yeah, hopefully that answers your questions. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion about the game, and really nice to talk about Sunderland win. Everything crossed, we have another positive result to talk about next week after the second leg, but obviously we'll wait and see. Thanks for watching.